Good morning, everyone. This talk today is going to be about Damodar K. Mavalankar, who was an early member of the Theosophical Society, who is said to have gone to study and live with the masters in the Himalayas. So Damodar was born in the family of the Karhada Maharashtra caste of Brahmanas, which was a wealthy Indian family. His father was Keshav Narsingh Mavalankar, first president of the Blavatsky Lodge in Bombay, or Mumbai as it is now known. Apart from learning the tenets of his religion by his father from an early age, he also received a very good English education. When he was ill as a child, he met his guru, Kudhume, who we also know as KH, who promised to take him under his protection. In 1879, he met Colonel Olcott and HPB in Mumbai after they had just established the Theosophical Society's temporary Indian headquarters there, and they later moved to Adyar. On August 3rd, 1879, he joined the society in Mumbai. Several of his relatives, including his father and his uncle, also became members. Damodar, however, went a step further, giving up his caste, which proved to be a very controversial decision. In 1880, he officially became a Buddhist while in Sri Lanka, taking Buddhist vows along with Colonel Olcott and H.P. Blavatsky at Galle on May 25th, which was the Wesak festival and marks the birth of Gautama Buddha. So the precepts that they would follow, the first would consist of a prohibition of killing both humans and animals. The second is against theft. The third precept prohibits sexual misconduct or adultery in all its forms. The fourth precept is about abstaining from falsehood, spoken or committed by any action, as well as malicious speech, harsh speech, and gossip. The fifth prohibits intoxication through alcohol, drugs, or other means. Of course, this is for people who want to commit themselves to the Buddhist path, to a serious Buddhist path. They're meant to develop the mind and the character to make progress on the path to enlightenment. Obviously, they're only meant for people, as I said, who are seriously committed to the spiritual path. Just to give them up because someone says you must or would be wrong. You really would have to want to follow that path, otherwise you're just kidding yourself, really. So the Theosophical Masters had many times wrote about their connection to Gautama Buddha, and the Mahachohan, who was the Theosophical Master's special master, wrote that we, the devoted followers of that spirit incarnate of absolute self-sacrifice, of philanthropy, divine kindness, as of all the highest virtues attainable on this earth of sorrow, the man of men, Gautama Buddha, should ever allow the Theosophical Society to represent the embodiment of selfishness, the refuge of the few, with no thought in them for the many, is a strange idea, my brothers. A very strange idea. So Gautama Buddha is said to be the head of the Trans-Himalayan Brotherhood that helped with the founding of the Theosophical movement. It is said that Gautama Buddha incarnated in Sri Shankaracharya in India, and it's hinted by H.P. Blavatsky that he also incarnated in Jesus. And then later on in Tsongkhapa, who was the founder of the Gelugpa or Yellowcap sect in Tibet in the 14th century, because Buddhism at that time had become rather corrupt. And there were the Ningpa sect, which was also known as the Red Caps, who were doing various practices that were against the Buddhist precepts. So Tsongkhapa, he kind of brought in this Yellow Cap sect, Yellow Cap sect, which are known as the Gelugpa. So there have been many Buddhas throughout history, and the future one is said to be Maitreya, who will come at the end of the Kali Yuga, which is a long time off. I've mentioned in previous talks that the Kali Yuga started with the death of Krishna over 5,000 years ago. It's meant to last 432,000 years, of which we've had 5, so there's 427,000 years to go yet, which may seem a little bit pessimistic or a little bit off-putting, but there will be other teachers and spiritual teachers in between that arrive. He's just a big one at the end. There will probably be hundreds of other spiritual leaders and teachers in between that time. Damodar's actions displeased his family and led to conflict due to them wanting him to return home and live with his wife, who was given to him in his childhood, or face the consequences of being cut out of his will. In response to this, Damodar gave up an income of 50,000 Indian rupees to provide for the future of his would-be wife and continued to live and work with the Theosophical founders. So about giving up his caste, he writes, "I was born in the family of the Kharada Maharashtra caste of Brahmins, as my surname will indicate. My father carefully educated me in the tenets of our religion and, in addition, gave me every facility for acquiring an English education. Until I was about 14, I was very much exercised in mind upon the subject of religion and devoted myself with great ardour to our orthodox religious practices. Then my ritualistic observances were crowded aside by my scholastic studies. But until about 9 months ago, my religious thoughts and aspirations were entirely unchanged. At this time, I had the inestimable good fortune to read Isis Unveiled, a master key to the mysteries of ancient and modern science and theology, and to join the Theosophical Society. It is no exaggeration to say that I have been a really living man only these few months. For between life as it appears to me now and life as I comprehended it before, there is an unfathomable abyss. I feel now that for the first time I have a glimpse of what man and life are, the nature and powers of the one, the possibilities, duties and joys of the other. Before, though ardently ritualistic, I was not really enjoying happiness and peace of mind. I simply practiced my religion without understanding it. The world bore just as hard upon me as upon others, and I could get no clear view of the future. The only real thing to me seemed the day's routine. At best, the horizon before me extended only to the rounding of a busy life with the burning of my body and the obsequial ceremonies rendered to me by friends. My aspirations were only for more zamindaries, social position, and the gratification of whims and appetites. But my later reading and things have shown me that all these are but the vapours of a dream, and that only he who is worthy of being called man, who has made caprice his slave and the perfection of his spiritual self a grand object of his efforts, as I could not enjoy these convictions and my freedom of action within my caste, I am stepping outside of it. In making this profession, let it be understood that I have taken this step not because I am a theosophist, but because in studying theosophy, I have learnt and heard of the ancient splendour and glory of my country, the highly esteemed land of Aryavata. Joining the Theosophical Society does not interfere with the social, political, or religious relations of any person. All have an equal right in the society to hold their opinions. So far from persuading me to do what I have done, Madame Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott have strongly urged me to wait until some future time, when I might have had ampler time to reflect. But the glimpse I have got into the former greatness of my country makes me feel sadly for her degeneration. I feel it, therefore, my bounden duty to devote all my humble powers to her restoration. Besides, histories of various nations furnish to us many examples of young persons having given up everything for the sake of their country and having ultimately succeeded in gaining their aims. Without patriots, no country can rise. Also, he was very devoted to H.P. Blavatsky, and she wrote privately to an Indian friend that Damodar was the only true devoted friend I had in all India, the only one who, having the master's and my secret, knew the whole truth, and therefore knew that whatever people thought, being blinded by appearance, that I had never deceived anyone. Though I was bound in my oath and pledge to conceal much from everyone, even Olcott, Colonel Olcott, who was one of the co-founders. After meeting HPB, his interior vision gradually opened, and again he knew the guru of his childhood vision, his master KH. It increased his devotion to theosophy. His psychic powers made him the centre of many phenomena. Between 25th to 27th of November, 1883, he visited the ashram of his master KH to undergo certain training. From frail and timid, he returned bold and energetic. Describing one of these initiatory experiences in an 1881 letter to W.Q. Judge, he says, "At about 2 a.m, after finishing my work, I locked the door of the room and lay in my bed. Within about 2 or 3 minutes, I heard HPB's voice in her room calling me. I got up with a start and went in. She said, 'Some persons want to see you,' and after a moment added, 'Now go out. Do not look at me.' Before, however, I had time to turn my face, I saw her gradually disappear on the spot, and from that very ground rose up the form of," and he put 3 dots in a triangle, which is a sign of a high initiate. By the time I turned back, I saw others dressed in what I afterwards learned to be Tibetan clothes. One of them remained with 3 dots in HPB's room. The other one I found seated on my bed by the time I came out. I saluted him and asked him if he had any orders to give. He said, "If there are any, they will be told to you without being asked." Then he told me to stand still for some time and began to look at me fixedly. I felt a very pleasant sensation, as if I was getting out of my body. I cannot say now what time passed between that and what I am now going to relate. But I saw I was in a peculiar place. It was the upper end of Kashmir, at the foot of the Himalayas. I saw I was taken to a place where there were only 2 houses just opposite to each other, and no other sign of habitation. From one of these came out the person who had written to me the Hindi letter above referred to, and who has been subsequently corresponding with me. I may mention to you his name, since he has allowed it to be published in Mr. Sinnett's book called The Occult World, which has just come out. Mr. Sinnett has dedicated the book to this person, Kuthumi. It was his house. Opposite him, stops, 3 dots again. So Brother K ordered me to follow him. After going a short distance, about half a mile, we came to a natural subterranean passage, which is under the Himalayas. The path is very dangerous. There's a natural causeway on the river Indus, which flows underneath in all its fury. Only one person can walk on it at a time, and one false step seals the fate of the traveller. Besides this causeway, there are several valleys to be crossed. After walking a considerable distance through this subterranean passage, we came into an open plain in, and she's put L, 3 lines K. I don't know what, maybe Ladakh, I don't know. There's a large, massive building, thousands of years old. In front of it is a huge Egyptian tower. The building rests on 7 big pillars in the form of pyramids. The entrance gate has a large triangular arch. Inside are various apartments. The building is so large that I think it can easily contain 20,000 people. I was shown some of these compartments. This is the chief central place where all those of our section who are found deserving of initiation into mysteries have to go for their final ceremony and stay there the requisite period. I went up with my guru to the great hall. The grandeur and serenity of the place is enough to strike anyone with awe. The beauty of the altar, which is in the centre and at which every candidate has to take his vows at the time of his initiation, is sure to dazzle the most brilliant eyes. The splendour of the chief's throne is incomparable. Everything is in a geometrical principle and containing various symbols which are explained only to the initiate. But I cannot say more now, as I come under an obligation of secrecy, which Kay took from me there. While standing there, I do not know what happened, but suddenly I got up and found myself in my bed. It was about 8 in the morning. What was it that I saw? Was it a dream or a reality? If a reality, how could I traverse the whole of the Himalayas, even in my astral body, in so short a time? Perplexed with these ideas, I was sitting silent when down fell a note on my nose. I opened it and found inside that it was not a dream, but I was taken in some mysterious way in my astral body, the real place of initiation, where I shall be in my body for the ceremony, if I show myself deserving of the blessing. My joy at that moment can be more easily conjectured than described, but enough. So Damodar had more of these experiences, which are fascinating to read. He also wrote many articles for the Theosophist and other magazines on various spiritual and occult topics. Damodar also became secretary of the Theosophical Society in India, and on many occasions demonstrated his psychic powers. Some of these were offered by Colonel Olcott to members of the Society for Psychical Research. At Moradabad, on the evening of the 10th of November, 1882, he announced that he would go in his astral body to the headquarters of the Society, more than 1,000 miles away. He shut himself up in his room, came out in a few minutes, and gave a message, which he said came from the headquarters, which is now situated at Adyar in Madras. The message was taken down and attested to by several witnesses. He then added that a confirmation of it would come by telegram, and this actually happened the next morning. And the other Damodar case is of a similar character. So he announced an accident to Madame Blavatsky, which was only made known by telegram the next day, and which he could not possibly have known in the ordinary way. So HPB related an account of Damodar speaking with his astral voice in a letter to Colonel Olcott on November 11, 1883. And it goes like this. She says, "Last night about 5 p.m, as I was cleaning the portraits in the shrine, and Monsieur Colomb was in my bedroom, walling with 2 masons the window, I suddenly heard Damodar's voice. I did not believe my ears at first. I saw like a cloud, whitish, transparent, flickering, moving from shrine to my table, and from table again to shrine. But his voice came from the latter, as though through Mahatma Kashmir's portrait." Mahatma Kashmir is Mahatma KH, who came from Kashmir. And yet Damodar's voice, he was telling me of some Shankar or Sandhar Singh asking you a mesmeric help for some boys and invalids at Moradabad, and praying that I should beg of the masters to give permission or ask for instructions. I promised them to come to you personally in my astral soul and deliver them the master's answer to that effect. Please telegraph to me to Moradabad the answer you will now have. But I have no answer, I said, and suppose master does not choose to answer me. And then a thought struck me, and I told to what I suppose was Dwaj Kul playing tricks with me and taking Damodar's shape. Dwaj Kul is another one of the students of the masters. Now, don't be bamboozling me, Master Benjamin. I then heard Master Sahib's voice, who spoke very seriously and said very loud, "You are mistaken. It's Damodar. Tell him to say so-and-so." What I telegraphed, I now forget. But he made me write it down under his dictation then. And then the flickering cloud, Damodar's abortive attempts to materialize thoroughly, I suppose, disappeared after some words in Maratha, as though thanking the master. Gurudeva called him. Mr. Kulum came suddenly into the room, exclaiming, "Ah, Shiva Damodar, don la retour, uetio," which means Damodar has returned. Where is he? I told him he must have been dreaming, that Damodar was not de retour or returned. But he insisted that he had heard his voice. And then Babula, take it another member, joined chorus and swears to me that he heard Damodar speak to me from the passage. Well, I be hung if Damodar is not developing at the rate of 60 miles an hour. So that's an interesting little thing from HPB in a usual style. So the year 1884 was critical, not only for Damodar, but also for the Theosophical Society as well. It was the year that saw the commencement of the Coulomb crisis. Olcott and Blavatsky were in Europe, and Damodar had been left to shoulder a great deal of responsibility for affairs at the Adyar headquarters. He wrote long and detailed letters to the founders, warning them of the serious nature of the Coulomb's plotting, but there was little that they could do at such a distance. Now, Mademoiselle Coulomb was constantly trying to raise, or Madame Coulomb was constantly trying to raise money. And when an Indian prince complained that Madame Coulomb was attempting to blackmail him for a large sum, H.P. Blavatsky intervened and put a stop to her scheming. Madame Coulomb swore revenge. At Adyar, HPB had a cabinet built in a room called the Shrine Room. It was in this cabinet that letters from the masters would appear. One time, while HPB, as we call H.P. Blavatsky, of course, was away, the Coulombs cut a hole into the back of the cabinet through the wall and into a wardrobe in her bedroom next door. This made it appear as though HPB was putting the letters through the hole and into the cabinet herself. The couple claimed that the letters were not messages from the masters at all. They even forged some letters themselves to make it appear that HPB was working with them in this deception. Unfortunately, these claims coincided with an investigation into the phenomena at Adyar by Richard Hodgson of the Society for Psychical Research, who during his less than thorough inquiries was taken in by the Coulombs' evidence. He decided that HPB was a fraud. The publication of the Society for Psychical Research report in England provoked much bad publicity, both to her and the Society. She returned to India determined to sue for slander, but the executive committee of the Society would not back her. Olcott managed to persuade her from taking the matter to court. After having resigned her editorship of the magazine the Theosophist, which she had founded on March 31st, 1885, she left India never to return. And she always believed that she hadn't got the support that she needed from the members there. In April 1986, the Society for Psychical Research Journal, in the interest of truth and fair play, published a critical analysis of the Hodgson report by handwriting expert Vernon Harrison, who found it riddled with slanted statements, conjectures, advanced as fact or probable fact, uncorroborated testimony of unnamed witnesses, selection of evidence, and downright falsity. Dr. Harrison, a professional examiner of questioned documents, continued his research, including a line-by-line examination of 1,323 colour slides of the Mahatma letters, and in a second monograph in 1997, concluded that the Hodgson report is even worse than I had thought. So eventually HPB was vindicated, but a long time after her death. Meanwhile, friction back in the 19th century, friction has also developed between Damodar and Franz Hartmann, another member, who was chairman of the board of control at Adyar. Hartmann seems to have resented the correspondence that took place between Damodar and the founders. The stresses of this time aggravated the tubercular condition that Damodar suffered from, and he began hemorrhaging. He sought and received permission from his master to go to his ashram in Tibet. So Damodar left Adyar on February the 23rd, 1885, and he was never seen again. But a message came from the Tibetan ashram in June 1886 claiming that he was alive and well. Nothing more was heard from him. I couldn't find the exact quote that I wanted, but I remember HPB saying that he was the one chela that had succeeded despite the Kali Yuga, and would one day probably become a master. Almost alone among hundreds of other earnest aspirants was he found qualified to proceed to the Tibetan mounted home of the Mahatmas Kutumi and Maurya. When in Tibetan disguise, he was brought to the frontier by his escort. Confirmation was sent by the ashram in June 1886, stating that Damodar was alive and safe. One of his last messages said, "I took bhat, which is rice, in the morning and proceeded from Kabi alone, sending my things with the coolies to Darjeeling." So these were the last words written by Damodar Kemayavalanka that have been made public. They were penned in a small pocket diary, which was sent back to his friends as he set out on the last lap from Darjeeling in British India on his pilgrimage to the lands beyond the giant crest of Kanchenjunga, which towers 28,000 feet into the blue. Shigatse, the seat of the Tashi Lama, is 25 days' march from Darjeeling, and it was towards this goal that Damodar went, in company with a party sent to meet him. We learn from Colonel Olcott that Damodar's record since joining HPB and myself at Bombay is one of unbroken energy and unfaltering zeal in the cause of humanity. As Colonel Olcott says, "A nobler heart never beat in a human breast, and his departure was one of the hardest blows we ever received. As above remarked, it almost broken down his constitution by incessant official work, and when leaving Adyar, had begun to spit blood and show signs of a rapid decline. Yet with undaunted courage, he undertook the hard journey across the Himalayas, indifferent to the biting cold, the drifted snow, the lack of shelter and food, intent upon reaching the Guru, whom he had first seen in his youth, when lying on a sick bed, of whom he had lost sight for many years, but whom he had recovered soon after joining the Theosophical Society as his spiritual faculties developed, and he was able to seek him in the Sukshma Sharira, or the astral. What made him so devotedly attached and unswervingly loyal to HPB was the discovery that this guru was one of the adepts behind our movement, the intimate associate of Upasika. Upasika is a female Buddhist kind of lay disciple, as he always subsequently called HPB. From the chief coolie of his escort, that's Colonel Olcott, got particulars about him of great interest. Damodar would not keep any more clothes than the ascetic costume he was wearing, nor any of the rice, meal, pulse, or other dry provisions with which his friends had supplied him. The most he would do was to let the chief coolie bake him a dozen chapatis, or unleavened pancakes. The last that was seen of him by the coolies was when, with face turned towards the Tibetan frontier, he trudged painfully on and disappeared behind a turning on the road. And those details are from the old diary leaves, which Colonel Olcott wrote, volume 3, page 265 to 6. So we can only speculate on what happened to Damodar after that. Probably he's going through initiations on his way to becoming a Mahatma, which he probably achieved. What kind of work he did in the world, we do not know. But I'm sure he became one of those bodhisattvas who work ceaselessly for the welfare of humanity. So here ends the story of Damodar. Thank you very much for listening. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace. Peace on earth and goodwill to all beings.